Luke Skywalker destroyed the Death Star, redeemed Darth Vader, and brought down the Galactic Empire. But why did his life only get harder after that? When Return of the Jedi ends, the young hero stands among friends at a celebration on Endor. The Emperor is dead, Vader is redeemed, and the war appears to be over. But in the expanded universe, now called Legends, that celebration was just the beginning. For the next several decades of storytelling, writers explored what happened after the happy ending and asked a question the films never answered. What does a hero do when there's no one left to teach him, and an entire galaxy expects him to rebuild everything the Empire destroyed? The son of Anakin Skywalker was the last of the Jedi, an ancient order that had protected the Republic for over 1,000 generations before being wiped out. His teachers, Obi-Wan and Yoda, were dead. He had almost no surviving training infrastructure, and much of the old knowledge about how to train new Jedi had been lost. And yet, everyone looked to this farm boy from Tatooine to bring the Jedi back. He had to become a teacher using lessons he barely remembered, a leader in a government that distrusted him, and a symbol of hope for a galaxy that kept finding new ways to fall apart. This is the complete story of Luke Skywalker in Legends. Across decades of conflict, The Last Jedi would confront cloned emperors, ancient Sith spirits, and an extragalactic invasion that claimed trillions of lives. By the end, the dreamer who once stared at twin suns would stand as Grand Master of a new Jedi Order. But the journey from farm boy to founder proved far more difficult than any battle against the Empire. The victory at Endor was far from a clean conclusion. In the book, The Truce at Bakura, the Rebel Alliance emerged from the battle heavily damaged, with carbon-streaked ships drifting through space while droid swarms performed desperate repairs. Human and alien bodies still floated in orbit around the forest moon. Despite the celebration on the surface below, the Alliance had suffered heavy losses and damage in a single engagement. The Empire was not instantly defeated, and the hardest part of Luke Skywalker's life was just beginning. The hero of Endor beat Vader and the Emperor. However, why does the galaxy get worse again anyway? The novel reveals that Imperial information control meant even days after Endor, some Imperial authorities dismissed reports of the Emperor's death as rebel propaganda. Imperial governors like Willick Nereus of Bakura remained in power, initially refusing to believe the news. Some dismissed it entirely as rebel lies, propaganda designed to weaken Imperial resolve. Even on a remote world like Bakura, the Empire maintained thousands of land-based troops and significant garrison defenses. The infrastructure of dictatorship did not crumble overnight, but persisted, stubborn and deeply rooted, across countless star systems. Governor Nereus proved just how dangerous this persistence could be. Rather than surrendering to the rebels or acknowledging the new political reality, he attempted to secretly surrender the young Skywalker to an alien threat called the Siruk as a gift in exchange for the aliens leaving his system. The Last Jedi was already a prize to be traded, a bargaining chip in the schemes of men who saw opportunity in chaos. The young Jedi felt the heavy weight of his new role immediately. He recognized that while others could pilot starships, no one else could recruit and train new Jedi. The responsibility fell entirely on his shoulders. He operated without a blueprint, often struggling to recall sketchy lessons from Master Yoda on topics like Force self-healing and discerning the presence of others. His training had been cut short by war, and now he had to pass on knowledge that he had barely received. His isolation was compounded by public misunderstanding and myth. As detailed in the same storyline on the cruiser Home 1, common passengers already viewed the young hero as a legend rather than a man. They asked if he had ended both the Emperor and Darth Vader single-handedly, their eyes wide with awe and expectation. The young hero found himself firmly explaining the truth. It was actually Vader who wiped out Palpatine. But the truth mattered less than the story people wanted to believe. The myth of Luke Skywalker was already being written, and he could not control it. Religious prejudice added another layer to his isolation. The farm boy from Tatooine encountered deep-seated objections to the Jedi from Senator Gariel Captizin of Bakura. Her faith, the cosmic balance, taught that Jedi upset the universe because the rise of a powerful Force user meant someone else in the galaxy had to suffer. Every rise required a fall, and every hero created a victim. This was a troubling sign of what lay ahead. Even among potential allies, the Last Jedi would face suspicion and fear simply for what he was. The galaxy did not find peace because new threats exploited the vacuum left by the Empire's fracture. The Sirruk, a reptilian species from outside the known galaxy, invaded Bakura with a horrifying purpose. They practiced entekment, a process where human life energy was harvested to power battle droids. The victims remained conscious, trapped within machines, their suffering prolonged indefinitely. The young Skywalker discovered that the Emperor himself had struck a bargain with these invaders, offering them prisoners in exchange for battle droid technology. This deal had drawn the Sirruk into the galaxy. Even in death, Palpatine's schemes continued to haunt the galaxy. His shadow stretched across the stars, touching worlds he had never cared about except as resources to be exploited. Facing this threat meant making strange alliances with Imperial remnants. The young Jedi had to coordinate tactics with Imperial Commander Tirthanis, trusting the Force to sense the man's underlying goodness despite his Imperial uniform. It was an uncomfortable partnership. He fought alongside soldiers who had served the administration that murdered his family, that hunted down the Jedi, that enslaved entire worlds. But necessity demanded compromise. The Sirruk were a greater threat than old grudges. He also took his first tentative steps towards training the next generation. The would-be teacher attempted to rescue an apprentice, Dev Sibwara, a Force-sensitive human slave of the Sirruk. The young man had been conditioned to serve his alien masters, his spirit broken by years of captivity. The Jedi taught Dev that hate was the dark side, and that a Jedi must fight without enjoying it. He offered hope where there had been none. However, the cost was immediate and devastating. Dev died shortly after being freed, his body too damaged by entekment to survive. The grieving mentor mourned a potential apprentice and faced the crushing reality that he might spend forever alone as a Jedi. The first student he tried to save was gone before he could truly teach anything at all. The experience forced Anakin's son to confront a grieving truth. Defeating the Emperor was only the beginning. The harder part was ensuring the light survived his own choices. He acknowledged that the stronger you become, the more you were tempted by the dark side's call for aggression and revenge. By the end of the Bakura incident, he concluded that his life required a daily commitment. Light endured, and so did darkness, and he would choose daily which one to serve. 2.5 years after the Battle of Endor, the war still raged across the galaxy. In the book X-Wing Rogue Squadron, the Empire refused to lie down and die. The war continued across many systems, with Wedge Antilles touring openly rebellious worlds since the Emperor's death. The dream of a swift liberation had not come true. Instead, the conflict had simply changed shape, becoming a grinding war of survival across thousands of systems. The Empire was no longer led by a Sith Lord, but by the Emperor's former intelligence chief, Ysanne Isard. Known as Iceheart for her ruthless efficiency, she maintained control over the core worlds and Coruscant itself. The galactic capital remained in Imperial hands, a symbol of how much the rebellion still had to achieve. Political fractures within the Empire created new dangers rather than new opportunities. The source describes how Moffs and military leaders like Zinj proclaimed themselves warlords, each competing to seize Coruscant and claim Palpatine's throne. The galaxy had not traded one conqueror for peace. It had traded one oppressor for dozens of smaller ones, all hungry for power and willing to kill for it. Some of these warlords controlled entire sectors, commanding fleets and armies that rivaled anything the New Republic could field. The Last Jedi had become a benchmark and a symbol, which distanced him from his former peers. Pilots in the New Republic's elite units were constantly compared to him and reminded they would never measure up to his standard. The bar he set was impossible for ordinary beings to match. To the new generation of recruits, the Jedi were figures of myth from the Clone Wars, and the son of Anakin represented the possibility of re-establishing the Jedi Knights. To much of the galaxy, the Jedi were already considered extinct. This highlighted his deep isolation as he attempted to rediscover the Jedi path alone. He was trying to rebuild an institution that most people believed was already extinct, using knowledge he barely possessed in a galaxy that could not decide whether to worship him or fear him. The transition from a rebel movement to a legitimate government was filled with chaos and political compromise. The Alliance's Provisional Council issued a declaration of a new republic, but this new government had very little in terms of real assets. It had to negotiate with worlds on their own terms, which were rarely joyous things. Some systems demanded protection, and others demanded autonomy. Still, others demanded bribes or favors or revenge for past wrongdoings. The new military was burdened by political appointees and internal bickering. Elite units like Rogue Squadron were used as propaganda tools to prove the New Republic was not just a gang of bandits, as the Empire claimed. Building something that could survive the next war required navigating a minefield. Allies like the Bothans, Corellians, and Thaifarans engaged in constant bickering and power games within the Council, while pilots like Wedge Antilles focused on the blood cost of war, counting friends lost and missions survived. The young Skywalker had become the ultimate hero whom others followed, yet he remained apart from them, focused on a destiny that went beyond the immediate political struggle. The Jedi beat the Emperor, but the galaxy got worse because the Imperial structure remained intact. The New Republic was forced to act as the tip of the spear, stabbing into the heart of the Empire just to gain legitimacy. Endor was not the conclusion, but the moment the Last Jedi learned that victory in battle means nothing if you cannot build something to survive the aftermath. Winning battles was the easy part. Now the young hero had to find the knowledge to rebuild an entire order, and the only way to do that was to hunt through the ruins of the past. If Luke Skywalker was the only teacher, then who would teach the Last Jedi what a Jedi was supposed to be? 5 years after the Battle of Endor, the spirit of Obi-Wan Kenobi appeared to the young Skywalker one final time. In the Thrawn trilogy, the ghost of his first mentor came to say goodbye, explaining that he had lingered too long in the mortal realm and must move on. The connection that had guided him through his darkest moments was about to be severed forever. He felt orphaned for the third time. First, his aunt and uncle had been murdered by stormtroopers, then Yoda faded into the Force on Dagobah. Now, the last connection to his father's era was about to disappear. The young Jedi felt the hollow pain of abandonment, the crushing weight of responsibility settling onto his shoulders. But Obi-Wan's final words provided the mission statement for this entire era. The farm boy was not the last of the old Jedi, his mentor told him. He was the first of the new. With those words, the ghost vanished into the light, leaving behind only silence and purpose. Now the young Jedi stood alone with no mentors, no training systems, and no doctrine, and he feared he was not a teacher. The memory of Obi-Wan's failure with Darth Vader haunted him. If such a great master could lose a student to darkness, what chance did a self-taught Jedi from a desert world have? The first real mission of this new era was a quest for reconstruction through archaeology. The young Jedi recognized that without a link to the past, the new Jedi Order would be incomplete. He would be building on nothing, creating doctrine from imagination rather than wisdom. The trilogy details how he returned to Dagobah specifically to see if Yoda had left behind any tapes, books, or anything that would detail the methods of Jedi training. Perhaps the ancient master had prepared for this moment and hidden resources for his final student. What the searcher found was heartbreaking. Yoda's home had already been reclaimed by the swamp. Vines covered the entrance, water seeped through the walls, and the living force of Dagobah was slowly erasing all evidence that the greatest Jedi teacher of the age had ever lived there. So much of the Jedi legacy had been lost to time, and what remained was scattered and fragmented. While searching the area, the young Jedi found an electronic cylinder in the Darkside Cave. This beck and call served as evidence of how dangerous surviving Jedi artifacts could be. The device was heavy with the dark side, its very presence a weight on his senses. It turned out to be an advanced slave circuit remote for a ship, once belonging to a Dark Jedi from Bibfash. Even the scraps of the past carried corruption. Not everything that survived the Purge was worth saving. The would-be teacher realized that most Jedi lore had been twisted by myth and ignorance over the decades. Finding a clear picture of the old order was nearly impossible. People remembered the Jedi as wizards, warriors, peacekeepers, or rulers. Every culture had its own stories, and few of them agreed, but he pressed on, searching for any knowledge that could guide him. During this time, an unexpected source helped him define a core principle of the New Order. The protocol droid C-3PO, in his usual anxious manner, accidentally taught the young Skywalker an important lesson. A Jedi cannot get so caught up in matters of galactic importance that they lose concern for individual people. The grand mission of rebuilding the Order cannot overshadow the duty to help specific beings in need. This would become a basic belief of his philosophy, distinguishing his approach from the sometimes distant Old Republic Jedi. Then, Luke encountered someone who claimed to have the answers he sought. On the planet Jomark, he met Jarus Sabaoth, who presented himself as a Jedi Master. The man offered to complete his training to give him the knowledge and power he desperately needed. For a moment, the temptation was overwhelming. Here was a teacher, a connection to the past, a path forward. But Sabaoth represented the unstable and corruptible version of what a Jedi could become. The trilogy notes that he defined Jedi as true justice and believed they should control people and events because lesser beings were immature and incapable of governing themselves. The weak needed the strong to guide them, whether they wanted guidance or not. Freedom was a luxury the galaxy could not afford. The young Jedi rejected this philosophy completely. He insisted that a Jedi uses the Force for knowledge and defense, never for attack. He refused Sabaoth's disaster for power and control, even when the would-be master offered to take the burden of teaching the next generation off of his shoulders. Sabaoth promised to train Leia's twins to handle the difficult work of instruction. All the farm boy had to do was accept his definition of what a Jedi should be. The temptation was real, and Sabaoth promised to teach the young Skywalker power that even a Jedi Master could desire. He spoke of secrets, abilities, and knowledge lost since the fall of the Old Republic. The young Jedi from Tatooine had spent years struggling alone, and here was someone offering to share the weight. But the truth about Sabaoth revealed the danger of shortcuts. The source shows that Sabaoth was actually a clone, suffering from clone madness. This mental breakdown was caused by being grown too quickly in Sparty cloning cylinders. His wild behavior, his exaggerated claims, his casual cruelty all stemmed from a fractured mind that cannot distinguish between teaching and domination. Sabaoth served as a warning to the young Jedi. Rebuilding the Jedi using shortcuts or without proper balance led to madness and the dark side. He realized that if he had failed to learn the proper methods of Jedi instruction, he risked losing his sister Leia and her children to the darkness. They were Force-sensitive, powerful, and vulnerable. Without correct guidance, they could become the very threats he was trying to prevent. The stakes of this archaeological mission had never been clearer. In the book The Courtship of Princess Leia, the young Skywalker's search took him to remote worlds like Tula, where he searched for the ruins of an ancient Jedi Master's home, hoping to find any surviving knowledge. If anyone had left behind useful information, it would be someone like him. His goal was to find more than a simple catalog of deeds. He sought the deeper mysteries of how the Order trained its warriors, healers, and visionaries. He felt that he himself had not been thoroughly educated in the ways of the Force. Yoda had taught him much, but there had not been time for everything. The war had interrupted his training again and again. The cost of the past became clear when he discovered what had been done to the Jedi legacy. The novel details that someone had deliberately destroyed what remained. In his search, the Last Jedi found evidence that a thermal detonator had been used ages past. The ruins were covered in soot and abandonment. Whatever knowledge had once been stored there was gone. The destruction had been thorough, and nothing useful remained. The knowledge of 1,000 generations had been reduced to ashes. The young Skywalker felt the crushing weight of his mission when he realized how complete the destruction had been. All those centuries of accumulated wisdom, all those techniques and philosophies and histories were gone forever. At this point, he was not just rebuilding an order, but was trying to recover from a cultural genocide. His only clue came from a fragmented, static-filled recording of Yoda from 400 standard years prior. In it, the ancient master mentioned a mission to a world called Dathomir to free a ship called the Chuanthor. The recording was barely understandable, corrupted by age and damage, but it was something. The young Jedi followed this lead, hoping it would provide answers. Dathomir proved to be unlike anything he had encountered. On this remote world, he encountered Force-using traditions outside the Jedi, most notably the Witches of Dathomir. These encounters forced him to define what it meant to be a Jedi when the traditional structures were gone. The Witches, or spellcasters, use words and gestures to manipulate the Force. They chanted, danced, and performed elaborate rituals to achieve effects that the young Skywalker could accomplish with a thought. The young Jedi realized that the words themselves did not provide the power. The Force flowed regardless of ritual. The spells were training aids, ways of focusing intent, but they were not necessary for someone who truly understood the Force. This insight was valuable because it meant that Jedi techniques were not the only path to mastering the Force, but they were perhaps the most efficient. The crucial distinction was intent, and the would-be teacher taught his new companions that a Jedi was defined by why they used the Force, not just how. Using the Force for aggression or dominion leads to the dark side, while peace, mercy, and justice define the light. The same power could serve either purpose, but the difference lay entirely in the heart of the user. Without a mentor, the Last Jedi had to learn through trial and error. He discovered that he could cast complex Force abilities silently and without the showy displays the Witches required. His level of mastery surprised even himself. Apparently, his training had been more complete than he realized, or perhaps necessity had forced him to grow faster than normal. The stakes of his mission were highlighted by the history of Alia. As detailed in the same source, Alia was a fallen Jedi who had been exiled to Dathomir by the Old Republic. Rather than accepting her punishment, she turned to the dark side and used her Jedi lore to tame rancors and rule the planet. Her descendants eventually split into groups, including the Night Sisters, led by a dark witch named Gethzerion. Luke observed that the Night Sisters represented the complete corruption of Jedi teachings. They offered dominion and fear instead of service. Their power came from the same Force, but their purpose was entirely different. If he failed to teach the light correctly, he risked creating a new generation of Night Sisters across the galaxy. The corruption of knowledge was real and present danger, and good intentions meant nothing without proper understanding. The chapter reached its peak with the discovery of the Chuanthor. The Last Jedi identified the crashed vessel as a mobile Jedi academy used by the ancient Jedi to scour the galaxy for recruits. It had traveled from system to system, seeking out Force-sensitive children, training them in the ways of the Order. The ship was a symbol of what the Jedi had once been capable of building. Eventually, he retrieved hundreds of reader discs from a metal locker that had been hidden for centuries by a clan mother named Rel. These discs contained more volumes of information than any one person could hope to study in a lifetime. They provided the doctrine and training systems the young Jedi needed to avoid the shortcuts of the past. Finally, he had something to work with. However, the young Skywalker's encounter with the powerful Gethzerion nearly cost him his life. Despite gaining this library of knowledge, the confrontation reminded him that he was no warrior and was still dangerously vulnerable to those who had mastered the dark side. He had the tools to rebuild, but now he had to learn how to use them without destroying everything in the process. With knowledge in hand, the Jedi faced his next challenge, turning theory into practice. The time had come to open an academy and discover whether his students would become heroes or disasters. Luke Skywalker could rebuild a Jedi, but could he stop his students from becoming the next disaster? In Jedi Search, the first novel of the Jedi Academy trilogy, the young Jedi officially shifted from being a lone operative to an architect of an institution when he addressed the New Republic Senate. Standing before the assembled representatives, he made his case for why the galaxy needed the Jedi to return. He argued that the New Republic needed a backbone of strength to survive the early struggles of the new Union. With the threat of Imperial remnants like Admiral Dalla's warships emerging from a secret weapons facility that had been hidden for years, he felt he must intensify the search for candidates immediately. The galaxy could not wait for perfect conditions, but needed Jedi now. His knowledge remained incomplete, and he knew it. To build his curriculum, the Jedi Master relied on a mix of sources: his memories of Yoda's training, the ancient Jedi holocron, and records from Dathomir. Each source offered pieces of the puzzle, but none provided a complete picture. He admitted that surviving the dark side had left his heart diamond hard. The extent of his own power sometimes terrified him. He had touched darkness and returned, but the experience had changed him in ways that he was still discovering. He chose the abandoned rebel base on Yavin 4 for his Praxium, the academy where new Jedi would be trained. While the Jungle Moon offered isolation from political interference, he worried about the mystery of the ancient Masasi ruins that scattered the landscape. The temple stones whispered of old powers, conflicts, and deaths. Could he stop a disaster if his students fell to the dark side in such a place? The setting was beautiful but troubling. The trilogy explains that his new model focused on finding adults and adolescents with hidden talent. This bypassed the traditional Jedi practice of training infants who could be shaped before developing strong personalities or traumatic histories. The result was an inherently unstable student body. These were people with lives, with pasts, with emotional baggage that infant trainees would never carry. Then, Gantoris was found on the volcanic world of Eel Shah. He was a man of contained anger, a leader of a struggling colony who had kept his people alive through sheer force of will. But he viewed the young Skywalker as a dark man from his nightmares. Visions had plagued him for years, showing a figure who offered power and destruction in equal measure. Was this stranger that figure, or someone else? To test whether the newcomer was worth following, Gantoris subjected him to deadly trials. The Jedi Master walked across a lake of fire to prove his sincerity. When a lava-dwelling fireworm attacked, he realized he could not use his lightsaber against it because the blade would be ineffective against molten rock. Instead of using raw combat strength, he used the Force to walk across the lake of fire, purely to fulfill his promise to teach. Only then did Gantoris agree to leave Eel Shah. The contrast between the young Jedi's control and Gantoris' rage was obvious from the start. One man sought to control his power, while the other burned with the desire to unleash it. Kip Duran presented an even greater risk. The book describes him as a brilliant but thin and tough teen rescued from the Kessel spice mines. He had spent years in that terrible place, surrounded by death and cruelty, watching friends perish from exhaustion and abuse. The would-be teacher's tests revealed that Kip had amazing power. An instinctive mental push from the young man threw the Jedi Master across a room without any training whatsoever. Raw talent like that was both a gift and a warning. Kip was fueled by a vow to never be helpless again after years of Imperial abuse. His hatred for the Empire ran deeper than politics. It was personal, intense, and dangerous. This combination of trauma and raw strength was an unstable mixture waiting for a spark. Then there was Streen, an elderly prospector from Bespin who had spent decades avoiding other people. He was bombarded by the chaotic thoughts of others, unable to shield himself from the constant mental noise of nearby minds. He represented the psychological burden of untrained force sensitivity. Without guidance, his gift had become a curse that drove him to isolation. Each student brought their own wounds and weaknesses to the academy. Luke had gathered potential, but potential for what remained unclear. The trilogy highlights the friction he faced as he attempted to lead an order while the galaxy demanded his attention elsewhere. His attempt to train his own sister, Leia, served as a warning. He found her blocked because her diplomatic duties constantly interrupted her training. Every time she seemed to make progress, another crisis pulled her away. If he could not succeed with his sister, training a large group would be significantly harder. Political resistance mounted as well. Senate leaders like Garmbel Iblis openly questioned the gamble. They cited the failures of Obi-Wan Kenobi with Darth Vader and the recent threat of the Dark Jedi, Jeru Sabaoth. If such experienced masters could produce such terrible failures, what would happen when a self-taught Jedi tried to train a dozen students at once? They feared the would-be teacher was simply creating a new generation of dark side threats. Unlike his days as a pilot, the young Skywalker now had to use Jedi meditation techniques to calm his anxiety because the pressure was constant and overwhelming. To find students, he repurposed Imperial technology, a force-detecting scanner once used by the Emperor's hunter teams to find and purge Jedi. He turned the tools of the purge into tools of rebirth, and the irony was not lost on him. The primary tension of this period was the looming threat of the dark side from within. Gantoris was haunted by dreams of a dark man who offered him secrets only to destroy him. The Jedi Master acknowledged the risk openly. If one of his trainees, or more than one, fell to the dark side, would he himself have the power to bring them back? The question had no comfortable answer. While the young Jedi tried to teach control, the galaxy was on the brink of war with Admiral Dalla, who possessed the Sun Crusher capable of triggering supernovas. This external pressure forced him to prioritize power and quick results over the slow, traditional path of the Jedi. There was no time for years of patient instruction, as the galaxy needed protectors now. In the book I, Jedi, additional details emerge about the Academy's troubled foundation. The Last Jedi established the Jedi Academy on Yavin 4 roughly 7 to 8 years after the Battle of Endor, utilizing the ancient Great Temple that had previously served as the Rebel Alliance's base during the attack on the first Death Star. The Jedi Master recognized that he, Leia, and her children could not shoulder the galaxy's burdens alone. He sought to find the thousands of Force sensitives still hidden across the stars. They were out there, using their abilities without understanding them, struggling with gifts that they had never asked for. The young Skywalker wanted to give them purpose and training, but his model lacked structure, and this would prove costly. Unlike the strict, age-restricted training of the Old Republic, the Jedi Master's Academy was a loose gathering of adults with established personalities and often traumatic histories. He initially rejected the idea of organized watches or strict schedules, wanting students to trust the Force to provide warnings rather than relying on institutional discipline. His own training had been unconventional, so he assumed unconventional methods would work for others. His own preparation had been cut short and conducted under extreme conditions. To compensate, he relied on a Jedi holocron and its gatekeeper, Bodo Boss, to supplement his knowledge. The ancient device projected the image of a long-dead master who could answer questions about Jedi history and technique. But even the holocron noted that the young founder was dealing with many unknowns. The gatekeeper could only share what had been recorded, and new situations required wisdom. With this, the student weaknesses became clear immediately, as detailed in the source, the dangerous backgrounds of the Jedi Master's first class. Cam Solazar was a former darkside warrior for the Reborn Emperor, while Brachus was an Imperial plant trained to be a spy. Kip Duran was brilliant but angry, and Gantoris had a massive ego and a fear of the Dark Man in his visions. Each of them carried vulnerabilities that enemies could exploit, and each of them had reasons to embrace darkness if given the opportunity. The Academy's location was also a fatal oversight. The spirit of the ancient Sith Lord Exar Kun remained trapped in the temples of Yavin 4. 4,000 years earlier, this Dark Lord had waged war against the Republic and the Jedi, and his evil presence had never fully departed. Kun exploited the students' weaknesses, offering them power that the young founder would not grant. He whispered in their dreams, appearing as a mentor figure, promising knowledge and strength. He provided Gantoris with the forbidden knowledge to build a dual-phase lightsaber. The colonists from Yolsha, hungry for power he could control, accepted eagerly. Gantoris then used this weapon to attack his teacher in a duel. The student who had questioned whether the young Skywalker was the Dark Man had found someone else to follow. Kun eventually seduced Kip Durin, fueling his hatred for the Empire. The angry young man from Kessel needed only a push to become a weapon. Kun provided that push, whispering about revenge and justice, about making the Empire pay for everything it had taken. Kip stole the Sun Crusher and used it to destroy the Karita system, wiping out billions of people in a single act of vengeance. A student trained by the Last Jedi became the pilot of an indestructible superweapon. The New Republic's fear that the Jedi could become as dangerous as the Sith seemed justified. The failure of the Academy's experiment resulted in immediate and horrific consequences. After becoming Kun's first apprentice, Gantoris was consumed by his own hatred and burned to death from the inside out. His body was left in his room as a warning from the Sith Lord. The man who had walked through fire to test the Jedi Master died by fire himself. Then the young Skywalker himself fell. During the confrontation with Kun and Kip, the Jedi Master was physically defeated and cast into a coma. His spirit was separated from his body, leaving the Academy leaderless and the students in despair. They believed they were all alone. Their teacher had failed them, or perhaps they had failed him. Either way, the gamble had seemingly ended in disaster. A central conflict of the early Academy was the tension between the founders' focus on control and students' desire for practical power. Students like Kip displayed incredible growth, blasting past their peers with raw talent. But this power fed their impatience, which the Jedi Master warned was the path to the dark side. They wanted to learn faster, do more, become stronger. They did not understand why their teachers seemed to hold them back. Koran Horn, training under the alias Kirin Halcyon, challenged the founders' methods directly. The storyline describes that Koran argued the Academy was more like a holiday resort than a training camp. By treating adults like children and focusing only on feeling the Force without the discipline, the young Skywalker had left them vulnerable to character failures. They needed structure, challenges, consequences, and they needed to be pushed. The Jedi Master's history as an orphan hero from Tatooine shaped his perspective. He was driven by a desperate need for redemption, having touched the dark side himself. This made him overly forgiving. He returned a lightsaber to Gantoris after the student tried to end him, hoping the man would teach himself where the line was. This approach nearly destroyed everything. Koran pointed out that while he was a Jedi Master, he was a first-time teacher who had missed evidence because he did not want to believe it. The young founder eventually admitted that his dream of the Academy was collapsing around him. As the crisis ended, the Academy had survived Exar Kun, but at the cost of students' lives and the Jedi Master's own confidence. The gamble proved that the Jedi could return, but it also revealed the terrifying ease with which a student could become a dark man. The dark side has found a way in through the founder's hope and a student's pain, but the Academy's troubles were only the beginning. Greater temptations awaited, and this time, they would target the Jedi himself. If Luke Skywalker already resisted Vader and the Emperor, then how does the dark side almost win anyway? The answer lies not in external enemies, but in the galaxy's belief that he must become a weapon. The dark side's strategy was to turn his hope into control. In the Dark Empire comic, the setting for this trap was a galaxy in chaos. The comic series describes a dangerous era following the deaths of Vader and the Emperor. While a new republic was proclaimed, the lack of thousands of Jedi Knights left the new government unstable. There were not enough guardians to protect the peace. not enough teachers to train new guardians, not enough anything. The story began in Imperial City, the name for Coruscant under Imperial rule. The world was ruined by civil war between Imperial groups fighting for control of the throne. Warlords and Moffs turned the capital into a battlefield, their warships bombarding each other while civilians hid in the ruins below. This setting served as a literal and symbolic graveyard where every dark power in the galaxy was drawn to the life force of the conflict. Death attracted darkness, and darkness attracted more death. The young Skywalker and Lando Calrissian had been commanding a captured Star Destroyer, the Liberator, which crashed on the planet's surface during the fighting. It was only the Jedi's skillful use of the ship's deflector shields that prevented everyone on board from losing their lives. Even in a disaster, his abilities saved lives. The Last Jedi was no longer just a pilot, he was viewed by his peers as a monumental figure of hope and a primary weapon of the Republic. Han Solo referred to him as the greatest Jedi Knight in the galaxy, emphasizing the immense pressure placed on the young hero's shoulders. Everyone expected him to solve problems, defeat enemies, and save the day. The weight of those expectations was crushing. The farm boy turned warrior felt a deep responsibility for his comrades that went beyond duty. When Han and Leia arrived to rescue him, he expressed a desire to stay behind to face an emerging dark threat. He sensed something using the dark side of the Force in unbelievable power. The presence was vast and terrible, like nothing he had encountered since the Emperor himself. He believed staying was his destiny, a mindset that the dark side would use to turn his sense of duty into a path toward control. The comic states that the young Jedi's martial power was at its peak, yet his greatest challenge was how and why he used it. Emerging from the ruins of the Imperial Palace, the Last Jedi faced an Imperial AT-AT alone. By remembering the lessons of the Emperor and focusing the Force against the machine's metal skin, he caused the massive walker to collapse upon itself. The display was impressive, even terrifying. But this was a double-edged sword. The young Skywalker was using techniques learned from the Emperor's shadow to achieve victory. He had absorbed knowledge of the dark side during his confrontation on the Death Star, and now that knowledge proved useful, this bridged the gap between his role as a protector and the dark side's strategy of domination. The same power could serve either purpose. Then came the Force Storm. A massive, monstrous energy storm of the dark side descended upon the planet, and he felt like he could not leave. He told Leia that the storm did not want her because it wanted him, and at last all the riddles would be answered. He viewed this encounter as an inescapable destiny because here was the source of the darkness he had sensed, and he believed that he was meant to confront it. Leia tried to remind him that his destiny was not lost, and that he was choosing to walk into a trap. She could see what he could not, that this was not fate calling him forward, but manipulation drawing him in. The young Jedi's greatest strength, his commitment to facing evil directly, was being used against him. In a crucial moment, the Last Jedi ordered his friends to flee while he remained behind with only R2-D2. He believed that to truly defeat the dark side, he must understand it from within. If he could learn its secrets, he could destroy it completely. The comic notes that the young Skywalker alone knew the levels of power and knowledge he had achieved, and the fragile position he had built. He was gambling everything on his ability to resist corruption. The chapter ends with the haunting image of Leia's brother standing alone as his friends retreated into hyperspace. She sensed that he was beyond her reach. He had chosen to walk into darkness, and she could not follow. The trap was set on Biss, a planet deep in the galactic core, entirely covered in the power of the dark side. The second issue of the Dark Empire comic emphasizes that the young Jedi was brought there after refusing to be saved from the mysterious energy storm. He chose instead to face the dark side power that had emerged to reunify the Empire. His arrival on Biss highlighted his growth into a Jedi of the highest order, where holding back became a deliberate and calculated choice. He did not fight his capture and told his captors that they were ready to become their prisoners. When facing the intense wave of depression on Biss, the Last Jedi did not lash out with physical violence. Instead, he called up an intensity of his own to maintain his internal composure against the psychic weight of the dark side. The planet itself pressed against his mind, trying to break his will, but he held firm. He realized that raw strength could not defeat this enemy. He must challenge the dark side from within by listening to its secrets. If he attacked directly, he would be destroyed. If he resisted openly, he would be worn down. The only path forward was submission, or the appearance of submission. The reborn Emperor Palpatine explicitly used the young Skywalker's heritage as a weapon to break his spirit. Palpatine had survived, his life energy transferred to a younger clone body after his death at Endor. The throne was empty, but the Emperor endured. He presented the son of Vader with the same temptation that had destroyed his father. Would the young Jedi take the place that rightfully belonged to him at Palpatine's side? The Emperor framed his prisoner's destiny not as a hero, but as the master of the world devastators currently destroying Mon Calamari. These massive weapons tore planets apart, processing entire worlds into raw materials for the Imperial war machine. Palpatine told the Last Jedi it was his destiny to command his discipline over the worlds that had betrayed him. The power to reshape the galaxy was being offered freely. The comic shows the young Jedi facing a terrible conflict as the Empire's arguments sank deep into his mind. Driven by the responsibility and guilt of seeing the New Republic's worlds destroyed, the son of Vader decided that there was no other way to defeat the Emperor than to submit and learn the secrets of the dark side to conquer it from the inside. He would become the weapon everyone expected him to be, but secretly working towards the enemy's destruction. In a chilling moment, the Last Jedi knelt before Palpatine, stating that his father's destiny was his own. The weight of responsibility became the dark side's weapon. By showing him the world devastators, machines more lethal than the Death Star, Palpatine turned the young Skywalker's hope for peace into a desperate need for control. If he could command these weapons, he could end the war, and if he could control the Empire, he could reshape it. The logic was seductive and poisonous. To the rest of the galaxy, it appeared that the greatest Jedi had not just been defeated, but had willingly allied with the dark side. The symbol of hope had become an agent of oppression. In the third issue of Dark Empire, the young Jedi appeared to fall under the Emperor's expanding power. But this fall was a calculated choice, though one filled with extreme danger. He told Leia in a vision that destiny had chosen him to follow the darker path because it was the only way to save everything from the power of the dark side, and he was trying to destroy the enemy from within. Han Solo observed that Leia's brother probably finally realized what he was up against and had to go it alone because it might be the only way for the Rebel Alliance and the galaxy. But this highlighted the young Skywalker's vulnerability. His guilt and pressure to be the ultimate protector led him to believe that he could control the dark side from within, and he thought his intentions would protect him from corruption. The path held terrible risks that the Last Jedi could not fully appreciate. On Nar Shaddaa, a fallen Jedi named Vima Dabota warned of the danger. She said that dark shadows creep down around the light and enter the heart. Everyone who kills becomes what they hate, and the trap of becoming a weapon was clear because power changes those who use it. The more the young Jedi used the dark side techniques, the more he would become like his enemies. If he remained the Emperor's servant, the Jedi legacy would be reborn not as a beacon of hope, but as an order built on the Emperor's everlasting dominion. The galaxy would have Jedi again, but they would serve oppression instead of freedom. Leia recognized this danger. She stated that her brother had yielded to the dark side and was wandering in the underworld. She insisted on a mercy mission because she alone could provide the emotional support to pull him back before he was fully consumed. The family would have to save him where willpower alone had failed. In the Jedi Academy trilogy, set after the young Skywalker's eventual escape from Palpatine's control, the experience had left permanent marks on the Jedi Master. The trilogy describes a man who was no longer the innocent farm boy of Tatooine. He was burned away by the personal hells that he had walked through. Leia observed that her brother had a haunted expression in his eyes. Having served the resurrected Emperor and touched the dark side, his heart was described as cold. and hardened. The open, trusting youth she remembered had been replaced by someone who had seen too much, done too much, and lost too much. He admitted that he now understood more about the Force than he ever dreamed possible, and sometimes it terrified him. He felt the crushing weight of being the lone remaining Jedi Master responsible for the galaxy's spiritual future. Every decision he made could determine whether the light survived or fell into shadow. He was deeply troubled by his inability to fully train his own sister. If he could not succeed with her, his entire plan for an academy might lead to disaster. This became the trap the Jedi Master faced. The New Republic took his words to heart and expected the Jedi to become that backbone of strength. When the young Skywalker addressed the Senate, he used his powers to project his voice and strength, realizing that appearances could be very important to command respect. The galaxy needed to believe in the Jedi, even if he doubted himself. Admiral Akbar and other leaders saw the Jedi as protectors to be used against threats like Admiral Dalla. The Last Jedi himself argued that the New Republic needed these protectors to stop internal fighting. But what happened when protectors became weapons? What happened when defenders became rulers? Senator Garmbel Iblis provided a warning that targeted the young Jedi's status directly. He asked how the galaxy could risk training a new order when even a teacher as great as Obi-Wan Kenobi failed and allowed Vader to rise. If the greatest Jedi of the Old Republic could produce such a monster, what would the would-be teacher's untested methods create? This suggested he might unintentionally create a new generation of enemies. But the struggle for the Jedi legacy was defined by choice rather than the destiny of being a weapon. Even within his own family, the Jedi Master faced resistance. Leia directly challenged her brother's push for her to become a powerful Jedi. She stated that maybe she did not want the job and argued that her life's work might be as a mother and diplomat rather than a warrior. The Jedi Master was forced to acknowledge that this choice was her destiny. In the end, the Last Jedi's greatest enemy was not the Imperial remnant. It was the galaxy's belief that he must be a weapon, and his own belief that he could control the darkness by joining it. He had survived the trap, but the scars remained. Now he faced an even harder challenge, protecting a family that had already become the galaxy's most valuable targets. The hero of Endor saved his father from the dark side, but could he protect the next generation from repeating the same collapse? In the book Spectre of the Past, set roughly 10 years after the defeat of Grand Admiral Thrawn, the Jedi Master found himself at a crossroads between his role as the architect of the new Jedi Order and his identity as a brother, friend, and protector. Luke had begun to consciously practice control in ways that went beyond simple combat. As he built his academy on Yavin 4, he struggled with the dark side's temptation. During a fight with pirate raiders, the novel highlights that the Last Jedi realized he had the power to simply tear off whole hull plates or rip enemy ships apart with the Force alone. He could destroy without effort and annihilate without touching, and the ability was terrifying. However, he was struck by a vision of Emperor Palpatine and Exar Kun laughing at him. In his mind's eye, he saw the two Dark Lords mocking his self-discipline, daring him to unleash his full power. The vision was a warning, and such casual use of overwhelming power was a path to the dark side. The moment you stopped thinking about the consequences, you started becoming a monster. The Jedi Master began to cut back on his use of the Force, except when absolutely necessary. He meditated on the examples of Obi-Wan Kenobi and Yoda, who both possessed the power to sweep away their enemies, but chose to face their fates with limited Force intervention to serve a higher purpose. They could have won their battles, but they chose not to. He was learning to make the same choice. This was where he learned his legacy was no longer just his own. It was reflected in the Solo children, Jason, Jaina, and Anakin. These children represented the future of the Jedi, but they were already targets in a galaxy that never truly found peace. They were tucked away in Nogri settlements for safety, hidden from enemies who would use them as leverage against their famous parents. Yet, they were still exposed to political sabotage and physical danger, such as a smoke grenade attack on Wayland. The children of Han and Leia could never truly be safe because their names made them targets and their abilities made them prizes. The Jedi Master sensed through the Force that he was failing to protect the next generation. He saw visions of his students leaving the academy empty and the Solo family facing a mindless mob. The images were unclear, more feeling than fact, but they haunted him. Something was wrong and he could not identify what. The cost for the young Skywalker was a growing social and romantic isolation. His immense power had become a barrier between him and everyone else. The Daimala, a powerful species in the New Republic, openly distrusted and refused to negotiate with the Last Jedi. The book details that they claim that Jedi who use as much power as he did inevitably slip into the dark side, which means his very strength made him suspicious. How long before the Protector became the threat, and the Guardian became the oppressor? Luke reflected on Callista, the woman he loved, who ran away because his power intimidated and frightened her. She had been a Jedi herself, but his abilities had grown beyond anything she could match. Being with him meant being constantly reminded of her own limitations. She could not bear it, so she left. The Imperial Warlord of the Week had been replaced by a systemic collapse. The Kamas document, a record revealing Bothan involvement in an ancient genocide, was tearing the New Republic apart from within. Old alliances were fracturing, trust was evaporating, and allies were turning into armed camps, ready for civil war. The Jedi Master's ultimate test in this era was a choice between his duty to the New Republic and his personal loyalty to Mara Jade. While Han and Leia argued that the New Republic needed him on Coruscant to mediate the looming civil war, the young Skywalker received a vision of Mara Jade floating in water, as if in death in a rocky cave. The woman he cared about was in danger, somewhere in the unknown regions. The Last Jedi decided to abandon his official duties to go on a wild treasure hunt to rescue her. This choice revealed the central struggle of his life. If he could not save those he loved, he feared losing his humanity. But if he focused only on those he loved, he risked the collapse of the order he was building. There was no right answer, only the choice he could live with. Just as the young Jedi thought he had moved past the era of the Empire, the stakes escalated beyond anything he imagined. He discovered clones were being used by pirate gangs and heard the full name of a ghost that he thought he had buried. Mithranu Ruido, the greatest military mind the Empire had ever produced, might still be alive. The son of Anakin saved his father from the dark side, but now he must face the possibility that the Grand Admiral had returned from the dead to repeat the collapse of the galaxy, threatening the very family he was trying to protect. In Vision of the Future, the Jedi Master was forced to confront the structural differences between his life and those of heroes like Han and Lando. While they fought to preserve the New Republic in their own ways, the young Skywalker was haunted by the realization that he had often been paralyzed with fear that he would use his power incorrectly. The Jedi Master admitted to a staggering list of mistakes in his role as a leader. The storyline states these failures included declaring himself a Jedi Master too early on his own, failing to move his academy off Yavin 4 despite the dark influence of Exar Kun, and failing to provide adequate protection for Leia and Han's children against repeated kidnapping attempts. He carried the guilt of not stopping Kip Duran when he first showed dark side tendencies, a failure that nearly wrecked the Academy and the New Republic. He recognized that his decision to experiment with dark side techniques on Biss years earlier colored everything he did for nearly a decade. The experience led to a period of foggy leadership where he was merely reacting to threats rather than following the Force. He had been contaminated, and the contamination spread through his decisions. A major turning point was Luke's conscious decision to stop using the power of the Force so much. Instead, he had reached a deeper understanding of the Jedi's role. He was learning a new way to be a Jedi Master. Mara Jade helped the young Skywalker realize that using the Force for raw power created too much noise. When he relied on sheer strength, he could not sense the Force's subtle guidance. The more power he used, the harder it became to know which path to follow. The Jedi Master finally understood why Master Yoda became exhausted while lifting an X-Wing. Yoda had the power, but chose not to use it. The old master understood that a Jedi's primary goal was guidance, not raw power. He could have lifted the ship easily if he wanted to, but he chose to make it difficult, to remind himself that effort matters, that power without purpose was meaningless. They believed that Jedi who used as much power as the last Jedi did would inevitably slip into the dark side. So his discipline was not just personal, but a political necessity. He was not just building an order for himself, but for a next generation already under fire. The lives of Jacen, Jaina, and Anakin Solo were the emotional core of this conflict. While they were safe on Kashyyyk during the Kamaz crisis, the young founder worried that his early mistakes, such as stating his teaching under dark side influence, would eventually flaw the foundations of the order they would inherit. The irony of the Jedi Master's position was that while the New Republic was on the verge of total civil war, he rushed to the edge of the galaxy to save one person rather than staying to mediate the crisis. This highlighted the struggle between his humanity and personal loyalty versus his Jedi responsibility. The cost of the young Skywalker's path was seen in his emotional isolation. For years, he believed that caring too deeply for someone would put them in danger, citing the fates of Gariel Captason and Callista. Everyone he loved became a target, and everyone he got close to suffered. He was continuously haunted by the vision of Mara Jade floating lifelessly, and this fear nearly led him back to the dark side when he sensed that she had been hurt. He initially wanted to avenge her through slaughter. The rage was there, waiting, always ready to emerge when someone he loved was threatened. Breaking through this isolation required a new kind of connection. The novel describes how the Jedi Master and Mara joined their minds in the Force to defeat Thrawn's guards. This depth of contact broke down the young Skywalker's walls. He realized that his new path required emotional openness rather than the cold isolation that he previously thought was necessary for a master. Through the Hand of Thrawn Fortress, the Last Jedi learned of hundreds of terrible threats lurking in the unknown regions. Threats that Thrawn was secretly building an empire to defend against. The galaxy was not safe and might never be safe. The sources hint at the coming Yuuzhan Vong invasion, noting that a 5-year war would shake the galaxy to its foundations, and that by its end, the Solo family would never be the same again. The Jedi Master concluded that the only way to protect the next generation from repeating his father's collapse was to change his approach entirely. He decided to turn the Academy into a place of personal, one-on-one training rather than mass instruction. He would focus on meditation and real-life service rather than the acquisition of power. Jedi would learn by doing, not by studying in isolation. He and Mara Jade envision a future where they travel the galaxy as a team, ensuring that the many vines woven together remain stronger than they could ever be alone. Together, they would build something that could last. In the New Rebellion book, the threat was uniquely personal to the Jedi Master's legacy as a teacher. The antagonist, Queller, was actually Dolph, a former student of the young Skywalkers who left the Academy after his family was murdered by the Jahar. Unlike typical warlords, Queller was a Force-sensitive extremist who built his power by literally absorbing the pain and death of millions through the dark side. Queller employed a simple but devastating weapon. Sources describe tiny Imperial detonators hidden inside the computer systems of new droids and X-Wings across the galaxy. This allowed him to cause mass betrayal and deaths on planets like Piter and Alumesh without needing a Death Star. One signal wiped out thousands, and another signal wiped out thousands more. The Jedi Master felt these disturbances in the Force as a wave of emotion, cold, hard, and filled with terror. The sensation caused him physical agony and a startling loss of control while training his students on Yavin 4. The deaths were so sudden and so numerous that they overwhelmed his senses. The Solo children were deeply affected by the thousands of voices screaming in the Force. They demonstrated their raw power by joining hands to beat back the cold darkness, unintentionally thinking they caused the explosion that hurt their mother. The children were not just sensitive, but powerful, and they did not yet understand what that meant. Their uncle noticed a dangerous fierceness and recklessness in young Anakin Solo. When Anakin suggested punishing the people responsible, Luke had to hold back his nephew, warning him that such vengeance leads to the dark side. The boy had good instincts, but dangerous impulses. He admitted that raising Force-sensitive children was more of a trial than anyone anticipated. He wished he could consult his Aunt Beru for guidance. She had raised him after all, and he had turned out reasonably well. But Beru was gone, and the Jedi Master had to figure out parenthood, even as an uncle, on his own. The Jedi Master faced the reality that his attempts to save students like Brachus and Dolph resulted in terror. He realized his arrogance may have given Queller the tools to destroy the galaxy by teaching him about the dark side's quick and easy path. Every lesson had consequences, and every student carried the potential for good or evil. On Telti, the Jedi Master confronted Brachus, offering him redemption and a return to the light. But Brachus was too broken and terrified of Queller to accept. Some students were beyond saving. That was a hard lesson for a teacher who believed everyone deserved another chance. During his mission to stop Queller, the young Skywalker's X-Wing was sabotaged and exploded, leaving him with a broken ankle and a back that was a mass of raw flesh. The physical toll of his mission was severe. The Jedi were not just fighting a military war, but fighting for their reputation within a fractured New Republic. The Senate was now filled with former Imperials who used the chaos to spread distrust. Senator Mato used the evidence of droid detonators to frame Han Solo for treason and move for a no-confidence vote against Leia. The Skywalker Solo family was under attack from all directions. Unlike Han or Leia, who could operate within political or military frameworks, The Last Jedi was forced to operate on a legacy battlefield. He was the only one who truly understood that the war was being fought through the Force itself. Blasters and ships were secondary, and the real battle was spiritual. To protect the Republic from Queller's personal vendetta against her family, Leia was forced to resign as Chief of State. This illustrated the cost of their names and powers. The climax showed the young Skywalker nearly losing his humanity to the very darkness he tried to prevent in his students. During the duel, the Jedi Master realized that his hatred and anger towards Queller were actually making the villain stronger. Queller laughed with the same cold laugh as the Emperor, fueled by his opponent's aggressive feelings. The more Skywalker hated, the more powerful his enemy became. To break the cycle, the Last Jedi prepared to sacrifice himself, as Obi-Wan Kenobi did, to stop feeding Queller's power. The intervention of Han Solo and his Ysalamiri, which created a Force-neutral bubble, removed both combatants' powers. This allowed Leia to end the threat, not with Jedi magic, but with a blaster, emphasizing the family's shared burden in the fight. The young Skywalker's burned right hand showed mechanical parts, and his back was covered in raw wounds, but he survived. He even befriended a giant psychic white creature called a Thurnby on Almania, a beast meant to kill him, and his compassion won over even this monster. The family under fire remained standing, but the scars ran deep. Soon, an enemy would arrive that the Force itself could not sense. What happens when the Force cannot solve the problem the way it always has? In Vector Prime, the first novel of the new Jedi Order series, the answer nearly destroyed everything Luke Skywalker had built. At the onset of the Yuuzhan Vong invasion, the Jedi Master faced a fractured order, struggling to define its role in a changing galaxy. He recognized the need for a singular purpose and direction, proposing the re-establishment of the Jedi Council to rein in the 100 Jedi Knights, setting their own agendas. The Order had grown, but it had grown without structure. Different Jedi pursued different missions, sometimes working at cross purposes. However, the young Skywalker faced disagreement from his own family. Jacen Solo viewed the Force as a path to inner peace and self-governance. He argued that adding bureaucratic layers to a spiritual connection steals the mystery and leads to the same mistakes as the Old Republic. The ancient Jedi had become strict and blind, and Jacen did not want to repeat their failures. Anakin Solo viewed the Force as a weapon and a tool for justice. This led to a war of words and physical sparring between the brothers over whether a Jedi was a warrior or a contemplative. They represented two different visions of what the Order should become. Kip Duran represented the aggressive faction, leading his own squadron of Jedi pilots to hunt smugglers and settle disputes independently of the New Republic's laws. This created a dangerous reputation that the Jedi struggled to control, and it revealed a deeper problem. Some Jedi wanted to fight, while others wanted to meditate. The Order was already divided before the real enemy arrived. The Yuuzhan Vong presented an extinction-level threat because they relied on living organic technology and were seemingly disconnected from the Force. The book notes that when Jedi like Mara Jade or her husband tried to sense the Yuuzhan Vong or their leader Nom Anor, they drew a blank. The aliens were immune to traditional Jedi sensory tactics. You could not feel them coming, and you could not sense their intentions. They were holes in the Force, walking absences that defied everything the Jedi understood about the galaxy. Their ships, called Coral Skippers, were living creatures bred for war, and their weapons, amphistaffs, and thudbugs were organisms trained to kill. Instead of shields, they used Dovin basils to create gravity wells that could strip away a starfighter's defenses or even pull a moon out of orbit. Everything about them was alive, and everything about them was deadly. The Yamask, or War Coordinator, acted as a telepathic hub, allowing thousands of Yuuzhan Vong warriors to fight with perfect coordination that mimicked a Jedi's battle meditation, but on a much larger scale. This was an enemy the Jedi were never designed to fight. Luke was forced to lead the Order, while the Republic Advisory Council actively worked against them. Under Chief of State Boris Kafalia, counselors like Fior Rodan labeled the Jedi dangerous and quick to the trigger. They blamed the Jedi for escalating sector-wide disputes, claiming the Force users created more problems than they solved. The New Republic was paralyzed by growing pains and internal corruption, and some counselors were potentially tied to the very smugglers the Jedi were hunting. Political interests came before national defense, and commanders like Warshak Rojo consistently underestimated the Yuuzhan Vong, leading to terrible losses of ships like the Star Destroyer Rejuvenator. The military was not ready. The government was not ready. Nobody was ready. The cost was immediate and devastating. While attempting to save refugees on Cernpadal, Chewbacca was killed when the Yuuzhan Vong used a gravity well to pull the moon Debito into the planet. The beloved Wookiee died, saving lives, but his death shattered Han Solo's sense of security. Han lashed out at Anakin Solo for leaving his friend behind, blaming the boy for a death that was nobody's fault. Nom Anor infected Mara Jade with Coom spores, a bioweapon that slowly altered her molecular structure. She was forced to use tremendous Force energy just to stay alive, highlighting the spiritual collapse when the Force must be used solely for survival rather than peace. The Jedi Master's wife was dying, and he could not save her. The Jedi were forced to adopt uncomfortable leadership roles and desperate tactics. The young Skywalker crashed an ice borer into a planet to disrupt the Yamask control, an act that resulted in the total destruction of the world Helska 4. It was a hollow victory where the enemy was stopped, but the world was dead. By the end of this early phase, the bubble of security that protected the Last Jedi's family and the New Republic was gone. He realized the galaxy had become a more dangerous place by far. In the book Star by Star, as the war progressed, the New Republic government began to unravel completely. Public sentiment turned sharply against the Jedi, fueled by Yuuzhan Vong's demand that the Jedi be handed over in exchange for a truce. The Jedi were declared traitors by the New Republic, and the Jedi Temple on Yavin 4 was destroyed. The narrative highlights that senators like Vicky Shesh argued that the Jedi Master was thinking only of his followers, and that the reckless acts of the Jedi had endangered the galaxy. The very people the young Skywalker had trained to protect the Republic were now being blamed for its suffering. Even Chief of State Boris Kafalia initially had a strained relationship with the Last Jedi, though he eventually attempted to align with the Jedi for his own political survival. Politicians sought advantage even as worlds burned. The conflict reached a peak when the Yuuzhan Vong launched a massive assault on the capital. leading to the fall of Coruscant and the collapse of the New Republic's centralized power. The pressure of the invasion caused the Jedi Knights to break apart. This created a gap in leadership that the Jedi Master struggled to fill while simultaneously dealing with a private crisis. His wife, Mara Jade, was dying from a fatal disease. A major rift formed between the young Skywalker and Kip Duran, who advocated for total aggression and using every resource to defeat the Vong. Kip argued that control was a luxury they could not afford. The enemy was exterminating entire civilizations, and half measures would accomplish nothing. Luke feared this path would lead the entire Order to the dark side. The Order faced a spiritual collapse as they debated whether it was right to destroy an enemy to preserve life, or if such actions made them no better than the conquerors. There were no easy answers, and every choice had terrible consequences. Jacen Solo specifically struggled with a vision of the galaxy tipping towards darkness. He saw possible futures where the Jedi became monsters, where their methods saved the galaxy but destroyed themselves. This led him to briefly abandon the Force altogether, refusing to use his abilities for fear of causing greater harm. The Jedi Master was forced into uncomfortable leadership roles as the Order transitioned from rebuilders to survivors. In an extinction-level event for the Order's next generation, The Last Jedi authorized a high-stakes mission to Murker to destroy the Voxen. These creatures were engineered by the Vong specifically to hunt and kill Jedi. They could sense Force users across vast distances, and they were nearly unstoppable. The mission to Murker was a death sentence, and everyone knew it. But without destroying the Voxen Queen, the Jedi would eventually be exterminated. The Jedi Master oversaw the Eclipse program, focusing on capturing and studying Vong technology. The Yamask War Coordinators were particular targets. If the Jedi could understand how the enemy coordinated their attacks, they might be able to disrupt them. The Jedi were forced to innovate new combat techniques, such as shadow bombs, proton torpedoes guided telekinetically by the Force to bypass Vong gravitic defenses. The most profound cost of this period was the death of Anakin Solo during the mission to Murker. The young man who had argued that the Force was a weapon for justice died using it exactly that way. He held off a Vong assault to allow his team to finish the mission. In his final moments, Anakin became a literal avatar of the Force, his body emitting an aura of light as he channeled the light side to its absolute limit. Eventually, his physical form was consumed as he melted back into the Force. The young Skywalker felt Anakin's death as a black void in his heart and a cold storm. The boy he had warned against vengeance, the nephew he had tried to guide, was gone, and the grieving uncle was forced to briefly hide his own presence in the Force to avoid distressing his infant son, Ben. The family was shattering from this occurrence. The Jedi were now the last hope in a galaxy that no longer wanted them. With Coruscant captured, The Last Jedi realized that the responsibility for keeping the New Republic alive fell entirely on the Jedi. The Order had evolved into a more militarized, focused unit, but the loss of Anakin Solo and the capture of Jacen Solo left the future of the Skywalker bloodline and the Jedi Way in a state of absolute uncertainty. In the novel Traitor, the galaxy was in a state of total structural and strategic failure. The capital of the New Republic had fallen and had been Vong-formed into Yuuzhan, the Creche of God. The Yuuzhan Vong physically altered the planet's orbit, stripped its moons, and turned the once global city into a nightmare image of Yavin 4, a jungle of ruins and alien life growing over the corpse of civilization. Nomanor characterized the New Republic's democratic system as corrupt and easy to exploit, noting it relied on directing the mob instincts of the largest masses of their most ignorant citizens. The fall of Coruscant was intended to be poison in the wound, designed to kill the spirit of the Republic. Yuuzhan Vong recognized the Jedi Master as the War Master of the Jedi and the architect of the New Republic. Nomanor admitted that the Empire might have crushed the Vong, but the chaos and lack of leadership in the young Skywalker's Republic provided the perfect opening for invasion. Ironically, the freedom the rebels had fought for made them vulnerable to this new threat. The Jedi were viewed by the Vong as unholy enemies who stood in the place of gods for the Republic, and consequently, they were hunted across the galaxy as prizes to be captured, tortured, and sacrificed. The war inflicted a staggering emotional and physical price on the Last Jedi's family. Jacen Solo confirmed he felt Anakin die through the Force. This death shattered the magic charm that had protected the Solo family and introduced the reality of permanent loss. They had believed themselves special and protected somehow, but now they knew better. Millions of survivors were displaced by the war, scattered across the galaxy in desperate conditions. Refugees fled from system to system, and host worlds often refused to let them land due to fear of Vong's spies or infiltrators. By this time, humanity was scattered and suffering. The Jedi could not feel the Yuuzhan Vong through the Force. As emphasized in the source, Jacen discovered traditional Force powers meant nothing against them. This led to blank terror within the Order. How do you fight an enemy you cannot sense, and how do you plan against an enemy you cannot predict? Jacen reflected that Jedi training had prepared them to use the Force as a tool, but against the Vong, that tool was useless. He realized the Vong must exist in a part of the Force that was simply beyond the reach of Jedi senses, meaning the Force was not broken, but the Jedi were simply blind. The moral dilemma deepened with Vergier's philosophy. This mysterious figure, who had spent decades among the Vong, challenged the very foundation of the new Jedi Order by claiming there was no dark side. She argued that the Force was one and does not have sides, and the darkness a Jedi feels was not an external corruption, but the raw, uncontrolled force filtered through the individual's own heart. The Jedi was divided on how to respond. While some Jedi debated using the dark side to gain an edge, others struggled with their own egos, the desire to be seen as a hero rather than actually serving the Force. Ganner Raiso provided a powerful moment of Jedi identity evolution. He sacrificed himself at the Well of the World Brain to buy Jacen time. Standing alone against thousands, his final stand became a mythic legend among the Yuuzhan Vong themselves, and even the enemy came to respect the Jedi who died defying them. In the Unifying Force book, the final novel of the series, the war resulted in an estimated death toll of 365 trillion beings. The number was almost impossible to comprehend, as entire species went extinct and entire civilizations were erased. Luke's wife was infected with a Vong-engineered molecular disorder, leaving him to fear for her life, while he simultaneously managed the war effort. Jacen was captured and subjected to extreme torture through the embrace of pain, leading to a radical change in his philosophy regarding the Force. The Jedi Order was reduced by half over the course of the 5-year war. In Destiny's Way from the same series, the greatest challenge to the Jedi identity was that the Yuuzhan Vong were completely lacking the Force. The source describes them as a void into which the Force could drain forever. Their culture worshiped pain and sacrifice, viewing technology like droids as an offense to be exterminated. With the fall of the capital, the government was in total chaos. Politicians like Senator Fear Rodan publicly branded the Jedi an obstacle to ending the war because the Yuuzhan Vong demanded they be handed over. Rodan labeled the Jedi amateurs and half-trained loose cannons who should leave it to the professionals. The military was near rebellion, feeling betrayed by corrupt, stupid, and cowardly politicians who fled the battle for the capital. A sharp divide formed between the Jedi Master's defensive stance and Kip Duran's aggressive group. The young Skywalker faced a deep spiritual dilemma. If the Vong were outside the Force, were they outside life? He feared that leading a war against an enemy he cannot feel might lead the entire Order to the dark side. Jaina Solo, dubbed the Sword of the Jedi by her uncle, fell into a spiral of revenge after the death of her brother Anakin. She eventually accepted her own death as certain, viewing peace as a luxury she could no longer afford. The war was changing everyone, and not for the better. During the Battle of Borleas, the Last Jedi and his inner circle formed the Insiders. This was a secret group intended to act as a rebel alliance within the New Republic to fight the Vong when the government failed. The Jedi Master was forced into uncomfortable political decisions, such as actively supporting Cal Omes for Chief of State to ensure the Jedi had a government ally. To disarm political opponents, the young Skywalker agreed to a High Council composed of 6 Jedi and 6 non-Jedi. This surrendered traditional Jedi autonomy, with the Last Jedi admitting they lost that power when the Old Order fell. They could not be independent warriors anymore, but had to be partners. He must then confront Alpha Red, a biological weapon designed for total genocide of the Yuuzhan Vong species. Though the High Council voted against it, Cal Omas ignored them, forcing the son of Anakin to choose between his oath to the Republic and his moral code. Genocide was not the Jedi way, even against an enemy this terrible. Luke was forced to evolve the Jedi Code itself. He defined aggression not as any attack, but specifically unprovoked attack or taking what belongs to others. Through the teachings of Vergir, the young Skywalker realized the Vong were within the Force after all, and the failure to sense them lay within the Jedi's perceptions, not with the Force itself. He realized they had been looking in the wrong direction. He accepted that the war could not be won through magic tricks alone. He adopted Admiral Akbar's strategy of luring the enemy into a trap at Ebok 9, where the Jedi acted as the bait. Jacen Solo suggested the Order must evolve because the enemy was not dark, just outside their current understanding. He told his uncle they needed to make the Force bigger by expanding their ideas about what it encompasses. In the storyline balance point, the war demanded a heavy personal toll from the Last Jedi and his family. The planet Duro was sacrificed due to administrative failure and the sabotage of planetary shields. During the collapse, Leia was captured and brutally tortured, her legs crushed as the Yuuzhan Vong attempted to lure other Jedi into a trap. Jacen Solo was forced to abandon his refusal to fight to save his mother, realizing that he must stand firm and engage the darkness with the light of the Force. The chapter concluded with a terrifying change in stakes for the Jedi Master's leadership. War Master Savong La issued a galaxy-wide ultimatum. The Yuuzhan Vong would stop their attacks only if the citizens of the New Republic surrendered all Jedi, specifically demanding Jacen Solo to be delivered for sacrifice. The Jedi became the very hunted prey whose existence endangered the worlds they swore to defend. The galaxy had broken. Now, the Last Jedi had to find a way to put it back together without becoming the oppressor everyone feared. Luke Skywalker rebuilt the Jedi once, but did he finally build something that could outlive him? In the unifying Force narrative, the answer required him to become something more than a warrior. He had to become an institutional architect. Following the defeat of the Yuuzhan Vong, the Jedi Master reached a deeper understanding of the Force that moved beyond the strict divisions of his youth. He concluded that the Force was not strictly divided into light and dark sides, but was a unified power. He believed that the dark side exists because conscious beings and evil actions upset an otherwise balanced natural energy. The darkness comes from within, not from the Force itself. He defined the Jedi's goal not as using power, but as living the Force through honorable actions and serving the good with every choice. A Jedi was not a warrior with special abilities, but a way of being in the universe. In his final negotiation with War Master Naschoka, the Jedi Master defined Jedi as guardians of peace and justice. He explained that the lightsaber was primarily a symbol of the internal fight to avoid the wrong path, rather than a mere tool of war. The weapon existed to remind the Jedi of their commitment, not to define them. This was the final decision of what a Jedi was. His leadership evolved into a flexible model that prioritized mentorship over absolute authority. The story says that he moved the Order away from a single Praxium model like Yavin 4, believing that any world where the Force was strong could serve as an academy. The Jedi did not need one temple, but many teachers. He explicitly stated that while he would continue to guide, other masters were just as equipped to teach, as he encouraged them to pursue their own paths of instruction. The Order would grow, not through uniformity, but through diversity. Even as he took a seat on Chief of State Cal Omas's advisory council, he did so as the voice of the Force, alongside other masters like Kip Durin and Silgal, rather than acting as a single commander. Leadership was shared, and responsibility was distributed. A core stake of The Last Jedi's final legend state was ensuring the Jedi did not become an oppressive or purely political entity. He had seen what happened when Force users sought power and would not repeat those mistakes. With this in mind, the Jedi Master warned the Galactic Alliance that the Jedi duty to protect justice may require them to act beyond the authority of any government. If that government attempts to define peace and justice on its own self-serving terms, the Jedi must be free to disagree. The Order served the Force, not the state. He argued that the Jedi were not meant to be the galaxy's police force. Historical attempts to do so drew the Old Republic Jedi away from the Force and into ordinary politics. They became government servants with lightsabers, and that made them weak. The young Skywalker acknowledged that his previous fatigue in combat came from a fear of abusing raw power, and he emphasized control as a means of staying connected to the Force's actual will. Power was a tool, not a goal. This understanding shaped the son of Anakin's earned role, not just as a hero of the rebellion, but as an institutional architect. To protect the Order's spiritual integrity, he supported the move to the ancient world of Ossus, creating distance from the political pressures of Coruscant. The Jedi would have their own home, separate from the government they served. He re-established the Jedi Council to ensure balanced governance of the Order that could outlive his individual leadership. He viewed the new Jedi Order as a project that would require generations to fully define itself. His hopes rested on students like Jacen, Jaina, Tahiri, and his son Ben. The stakes of failure were clear. If the Jedi Master's philosophy of control and independence failed, the Jedi risked becoming either a political tool of the state or a lawless force that mirrored the oppression they fought. By becoming the stabilizing center, the young Skywalker ensured the Order could survive the constant changes in galactic government. In the Survivor's Quest novel, The Last Jedi reflected on his journey with the perspective of decades. The source reveals the heavy burden of being the last of the Jedi, tasked with passing on what he learned, and he often felt his best efforts were not enough to rebuild an institution that took centuries to create. The Old Republic Jedi had thousands of years to develop their traditions, but Luke only had decades. By this period, he was recognized as the Reborn Order's founder and leader, balancing the responsibilities of the Jedi Academy with the diplomatic needs of the New Republic. His role was not merely held by title, but earned through his willingness to seek out knowledge from the past, such as the records of outbound flight, to determine what he was doing right and, more importantly, what he was doing wrong. This willingness to learn shaped the Jedi Master's matured philosophy, which was characterized by a core of hope and mercy that separated him from the oppressors of the past. He rejected the Palpatine model of ruling through fear. Instead, he advocated for putting the fear of justice into those who would do evil. The wicked should fear the Jedi, not because the Jedi were powerful, but because the Jedi were right. In combat against the Vagari, Luke demonstrated deep self-control by choosing to scramble the nervous systems and trigger sleep centers in predatory wolf kills rather than killing them, even when they posed a lethal threat. This discipline was described as his moral high ground, an extension of his humble roots that ensured even his deadliest opponents were given every possible chance to surrender. This approach shaped his leadership style, which centered on the Jedi as an independent moral force rather than a political tool. He recognized that his order must be built on harmony and a new interpretation of the Force, and he explicitly questioned and eventually rejected the old order's rules against love and marriage. His bond with Mara Jade Skywalker was a strength that brought the Force into balance, not a weakness that invited corruption. He viewed the future of the Order through the lens of individual potential. His desire to provide proper Jedi training to Force sensitives like Evelyn went beyond building an army. It was about preventing gifted individuals from being isolated or banished by a fearful society, because every untrained Force user was a tragedy waiting to happen. With this purpose in mind, he acted as a bridge between different groups, working with the Chiss and the Empire of the Hand to identify unknown enemies that threatened the galaxy at large. The Jedi were not meant to stand alone, but to bring others together. The Jedi's ultimate purpose was to serve others rather than rule over them for the good of the galaxy. The young Skywalker acknowledged the flaws of the New Republic, the constant fighting, political crises, and Bothan backstabbing, but he chose to remain its protector and to break the cycle of war and collapse. By the end of this era, The Last Jedi was no longer just a strong Jedi, but the stabilizing center who ensured the Jedi did not become the very oppressors they fought. His end state was the realization that the new Jedi Order was defined by walking in perfect harmony with the Force and each other, free from the strict rules that led to the Old Order's downfall. In The Joiner King, the first novel of the Darkness trilogy, the Jedi Master's story continued to evolve. His matured state showed him moving away from being a traditional commander. Instead, he adapted the role of a mentor, judge, and friend to his knights. He preferred to allow Jedi Knights their independence. He believed that if the Masters could not trust the good judgment of their members, then they were failing at their most important job. While his opinion held immense sway, he viewed himself as first among equals and asked for obedience rather than demanding it. This style caused friction with more traditionalist masters like Mara Jade and Corran Horn, who preferred clearer hierarchies. Amidst internal conflicts where some masters believed their primary duty was to the government and others believed it was only to the Force, Luke acted as the anchor. He forced them to resolve disagreements through Jedi discipline rather than personal grudges. His philosophy in this era was defined by the rejection of the casual use of power. He taught that a Jedi's judgment must remain sound regardless of their emotional state. He believed that the light and dark sides were not external forces, but spring from the well inside the individual. A key moment of self-control occurred when he fought the Dark Jedi Welk. The book notes that although the Jedi Master had the power to crush Welk's throat with the Force, he released him. He explicitly stated his philosophy: the Force may have no light or dark side, but we do, and we must choose. The young Skywalker carried a deep fear of Jedi becoming emperors or leaders of galactic civilizations. He believed it was too easy to abuse the Force to impose one's will on others, and he warned that power can quickly become the end rather than the means. After the Yuuzhan Vong War, the Jedi Master advised the Jedi to avoid involvement in ordinary concerns of the new government, as this would prevent them from being viewed as a mere elite branch of galactic police, because the Jedi were more than enforcers, they were guides. He also viewed the new Jedi Temple on Coruscant, a gift from the Alliance, with suspicion. He feared it served as a constant reminder that the Jedi might start seeing themselves through the eyes of the government and become simple guardians of a grateful galactic alliance. When challenged by Cal Omas or Raynar Toll, he asserted that the Jedi serve the will of the Force everywhere, not just within the borders of the government that pays their bills, but the Jedi answer to a higher authority than any senator or chief of state. The Jedi Master's end state was the creation of a sustainable culture of judgment rather than just a group of powerful warriors. He implemented training exercises like Scorch, where the referee, the Jedi in training, was tasked with finding solutions that satisfied everyone's secret agendas. This taught them to look for greater reality beneath words. Students were put through centering exercises, such as fasting during feasts or being tickled without laughing, to teach them to detach their emotions and remain focused in chaotic situations where control was everything. Reflecting his belief in free will, he did not force attendance at the academy. He believed students must want to be there to truly succeed, a policy he applied even to his own son, Ben. Luke recognized that if the Jedi failed to be a stabilizing force, the galaxy would fall into a cycle of collapse. He argued that a peaceful galactic alliance was the strongest pillar of a peaceful galaxy. If the Jedi failed to support that stability, the galaxy sank into chaos, and the Jedi had failed their ultimate duty. In the Unseen Queen storyline, the young Skywalker's maturity in this era was defined by a shift from being a reactive hero to a proactive institutional head. The source describes that he recognized that his previous hands-off approach, allowing the Jedi to follow their own consciences without unified guidance, had left the Order lost and leaderless. He accepted that as a master of the Council, it was his duty and privilege to lay blame where it belongs and provide clear direction and vision for his followers. He understood that a Jedi Master's promise must mean something real. Following the war, he concluded that a Jedi could not simply be a survivor or a powerful warrior, but must be a clear force for good. This required moral independence, where Jedi served the Force and the galaxy at large rather than becoming a political tool for any specific government. It required rising above self, where a Jedi would never place personal interests above the needs of the Force. It required reliability, where a Jedi must be an entity that builds trust and honor, even in environments where those concepts were alien. The Jedi Master identified that the ruthless, desperate philosophy adopted during the war with the Yuuzhan Vong had injured the Jedi by blurring the difference between right and wrong. His new philosophy emphasized principled action, and he sought to rebuild a sense of principle to prevent young knights from falling to dangerous influences like the Dark Nest. The Order struggled with the line between war and targeted elimination. While some masters argue that removing a threat like Rain Artol was a practical necessity, others maintain that such methods were not the Jedi way. The young Skywalker acknowledged that if he failed to prepare his masters to exercise control and unity, the Order would fall apart from within. The Last Jedi was the only force capable of preventing the Order from becoming oppressive or collapsing into chaos. The story notes that in the Jedi Master's absence, the Order immediately broke apart into opposing groups. Those who believed their duty was strictly to the Galactic Alliance clashed with those who believed their duty was only to the Force. Seeing this division, Chief of State Cal Omas attempted to exploit the gap in leadership at the top of the Order to take direct control. He hoped to neutralize the Jedi so they could not interfere with state interests. Politicians always wanted to control the Jedi, and this was exactly why independence was so important. Within the Order, the Jedi Master was viewed as the Elder, the senior presence whose guidance was required to channel the collective energy of the Jedi in a single constructive direction. Without the young Skywalker as the architect, the Jedi were paralyzed by their own internal disagreements. This understanding led Luke to realize that he must build something that prevented the galaxy from falling into a cycle of war and collapse. If the Jedi could not bring a sense of order to the galaxy, he feared they were no better than the Empire. His ultimate role was not the strongest Jedi, but the institutional architect who ensured that the will of the government was not mistaken for the will of the Force. He concluded that his primary failure was not being a better warrior, but failing to prepare the other masters to lead in his stead. In The Swarm War, the final novel of the trilogy, the Jedi Master reflected that 35 years prior, he became the last guardian of an ancient order that had thrived for 1,000 generations before being brought low by the Sith. Having been the instrument of the Jedi's return, he spent decades trying to rekindle that light. He eventually recognized his own arrogance in the way he structured the new Jedi Order. He eventually envisioned an order where Jedi followed their own consciences and hearts. But the chaos of the Dark Nest crisis proved this dream was no longer practical. To save the Order from tearing itself apart, the young Skywalker stepped into the role of Grand Master, a position of absolute authority intended to be the stabilizing center of the Jedi. The Last Jedi's leadership style matured from a mentor who suggests to a leader who demands. Witnessing his masters pulling the Order in 10 different directions, he realized that mistakes were less dangerous than internal fighting. A unified Order making wrong decisions was better than a divided Order making no decisions at all. He employed the Robogian Gambit, a diplomatic ploy where he asserted bold, absolute control to force the Jedi Masters to unite, even if that unity was in opposition to him. He issued a final ultimatum. If a Jedi could not place the good of the Order above all other loyalties, including family or the state, they must leave. A core component of the Jedi Master's end-state philosophy was the rejection of the philosophy taught by Vergere and championed by Jacen Solo. Jacen argued that a Jedi's only duty was to be effective and to act without being limited by ideas of good or evil. The young Skywalker countered this, stating that such ruthlessness was exactly what the Emperor taught his father, Anakin Skywalker. He argued that being a Jedi was not just about using the Force to achieve a goal, but about principles and responsibilities. The Last Jedi learned that a Jedi must not bury fear or doubt, but accept and eliminate it so it cannot be used as a weapon by enemies like Lomi Plo. The post-Vong philosophical settlement concluded with the Jedi Master defining the Jedi's place in the galaxy. The Jedi should serve, not govern. The son of Anakin Skywalker made the important decision to withdraw the Jedi from the Galactic Alliance Advisory Council. He believed that by remaining outside the reins of state, the Jedi could remain disinterested representatives who provided moral guidance without the corruption that came from using political power. He knew that if the Jedi took control of the government, even with pure motives, matters turned out badly. This was seen with the Khalid colony, where good intentions were not enough. His greatest fear was that the Order would not survive without him. This fear could lead to a cycle of collapse and war. To prevent this, he established a new Jedi Council to help run the Order, aiming to create a structure that could survive his potential absence. The Last Jedi sought to be a center that held the Order together without it becoming a personality cult or an oppressive force. When asked what would happen to this organization if he was unavailable, the Jedi Master admitted that he wished he knew the answer. His final act was not achieving perfection, but building the best possible foundation for a future he could not control. Luke Skywalker proved that one person could rebuild what an empire destroyed, but he was not the only threat Palpatine ever worried about. And while the young Skywalker opened his academy to anyone with Force talent, the Old Order he studied refused to recruit from certain species entirely.